Caleb Morton lived a life that could only be described as uneventful. A middle school teacher in a quiet suburban town, his days revolved around lesson plans, correcting papers, and ferrying his two children, Mason, 8, and Clara, 6, to soccer practices and ballet recitals. His wife, Vanessa, often joked that Caleb had mastered the art of being predictably reliable. They had a comfortable home, a tidy yard, and a daily routine that could be set to a clock. But things began to change when Caleb's father, Leonard, fell ill. Leonard was a man of quiet strength, a retired engineer who spent his days tending a modest vegetable garden and crafting wooden toys for his grandchildren. When the diagnosis came, stage 4 pancreatic cancer, it rocked the entire family. For Caleb, it was a call to action. He began spending his evenings and weekends at his father's small house, ensuring Leonard made it to treatments, cooked nutritious meals, and was never alone with his pain. Vanessa, however, did not take kindly to the new arrangement. "You're always at your dad's place," she snapped one evening, her voice edged with frustration. Caleb had just walked through the door after spending hours helping Leonard organize his medications. Mason and Clara were already in bed, and Vanessa was folding laundry, her movements sharp and agitated. Caleb sighed, rubbing his temples. "He's sick, Vanessa. He needs me." "And what about us?" she shot back. "You have a family, Caleb. Or did you forget that?" Her words stung, but Caleb tried to stay calm. "This is temporary. He's my father, Vanessa. What do you expect me to do? Just leave him to deal with this alone?" Vanessa's lips tightened into a thin line. "I'm just saying, it feels like you're abandoning us." Her accusation lingered in the air like smoke. Caleb didn't know how to respond. He loved his family, but Leonard's condition demanded his time and attention. The man who had once been Caleb's rock was now frail and dependent, and Caleb couldn't bear to let him face it without support. But Vanessa's discontent didn't wane. She began dropping pointed comments over dinner, complaining about Caleb's absences in front of the kids. Her tone grew sharper, her patience thinner. Caleb chalked it up to stress, taking care of the kids, running the household, but he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was amiss. In quiet moments, when he wasn't tending to Leonard or managing his classroom, Caleb would replay her words in his mind. Abandoning us. The phrase felt like a weight on his chest. Was he failing his family in trying to save his father? Or was something deeper beginning to unravel beneath the surface of their seemingly ordinary life? As Leonard's condition worsened, Caleb knew that the road ahead would only grow more challenging. Little did he realize that Vanessa's simmering frustration was the prelude to something far more devastating than he could have imagined. As Leonard's condition deteriorated, Caleb made a difficult decision. He requested reduced hours at the school. It meant a smaller paycheck, but it gave him more time to care for his father. Vanessa was furious. "This is ridiculous," she exclaimed, slamming a pot onto the stove as Caleb helped Mason with his math homework at the kitchen table. "You're sacrificing your career for this, for him." Caleb looked up, frowning. "For my father, Vanessa. I thought you'd understand." "Understand what? That you're running yourself into the ground for a dying man who won't even notice half of what you're doing?" Her words hit him like a slap, but Caleb held his tongue. He returned his focus to Mason, who had frozen mid-sum, his small face etched with confusion at the tension in the room. Caleb forced himself to smile. "Let's finish this problem, buddy," he said softly, shielding his son from the brewing storm. But Vanessa wasn't done. In the days that followed, her irritability turned into something more insidious. Caleb noticed how she began to weave pointed comments into conversations with the kids. "Your dad's always with Grandpa these days," she told Clara while braiding her hair. "I guess he doesn't have time for us anymore." Mason, overhearing this, frowned. "But Grandpa's sick, Mom. Dad's helping him." Vanessa sighed dramatically. "Sure, but families are supposed to come first, aren't they?" Caleb overheard these exchanges, his jaw tightening every time. He tried to counteract her influence, reassuring the kids that he loved them deeply and explaining the importance of being there for family in tough times. But the damage was done. Vanessa's words lingered in the children's minds, planting seeds of doubt Caleb struggled to uproot. The breaking point came on a gray, rainy evening. Caleb had returned home from Leonard's after another grueling day of appointments and small victories. Leonard had managed to eat half a bowl of soup, which felt like a triumph. He found Vanessa waiting for him in the living room, arms crossed, her expression hard. "We need to talk," she said coldly. Caleb sank into a chair, too tired to argue, but wary of what was coming. "What now?" Vanessa didn't mince words. "This can't go on. He needs to go to a hospice. We're not equipped to handle this, and frankly, Caleb, you're neglecting your family." Caleb's exhaustion gave way to anger. "He's my father, Vanessa. I'm not putting him in a hospice to die alone like some unwanted burden." She scoffed. "He's a pathetic old man clinging to life. What's the point of dragging this out? It's not like he has anything to leave behind, not money, not property, nothing. You're wasting our time and resources for someone who can't even give back." Caleb rose to his feet, his fists clenched. His voice was low but full of menace. "How dare you? Leonard is more than some old man. He worked his whole life to provide for me, to ensure I had a future. He's the reason I became a teacher. He's a good man, an excellent engineer, and a father who deserves respect, not this garbage you're spewing." Vanessa rolled her eyes, her exasperation palpable. "So what? You'll ruin your life for him? Lose your job? And for what, Caleb? To sit by his side while he—" "Yes!" Caleb thundered, cutting her off. His voice shook with emotion. "If that's what it takes, then yes, I will be there for him. I don't care about money or work or anything else. I won't let my father die alone." The room fell into a tense silence. Vanessa stared at him, her face a mixture of shock and fury. Then she delivered the ultimatum that would shatter their lives. "Fine," she said, her voice icy. "If he's so important to you, then choose, him or me." Caleb looked at her, his heart heavy but his resolve unshaken. "I can't abandon my father, Vanessa. Not now. Not ever." Her expression hardened and she turned on her heel. "Then you've made your choice," she said as she stormed out of the room. Caleb stood alone, the weight of his decision settling over him. He knew there would be consequences, but in his heart, he felt certain he had done the right thing. Family, he thought, meant standing by each other, no matter the cost. After a few days, Caleb was washing dishes when Vanessa walked into the kitchen, a thick stack of papers in her hand. Her expression was calm, almost detached, but her words hit him like a freight train. "I've had enough," she said simply, placing the papers on the counter. "These are the divorce papers. I'm leaving today." Caleb froze, the plate slipping from his hands back into the soapy water. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice hollow. Vanessa crossed her arms, her tone clipped and efficient. "This whole situation has drained me. You're obsessed with your father. You've abandoned me, abandoned our marriage. I can't do this anymore. I need space, a break from all of this." "A break?" Caleb echoed, disbelief coloring his voice. "Vanessa, this isn't some inconvenience. My dad is dying." She didn't flinch. "And I'm leaving. I need to take care of myself. I've booked a vacation for a couple of weeks. I'll have my lawyer contact you about custody arrangements." Caleb stared at her, his mind reeling. "So, you're just leaving? Dumping the kids on me when I'm already—" His words caught in his throat. "God knows where you're going, Vanessa. How can you even—" "I've made up my mind," she interrupted, her voice cold. Without another word, she turned and walked away, leaving Caleb alone in the kitchen with the papers that signaled the end of their marriage. That same day, Caleb received a grim update from Leonard's doctor. His father likely had no more than a month left, perhaps only a couple of weeks. The news weighed heavily on Caleb, but he resolved to make Leonard's remaining days as meaningful as possible. With no hesitation, he packed up Mason and Clara, their favorite toys, clothes, and books, and moved into Leonard's house. The children were a balm for Leonard. Mason's excited chatter and Clara's giggles brought light to the dim days, making Leonard smile in ways Caleb hadn't seen in months. Caleb took a long leave of absence from work, focusing entirely on caring for his father and raising the kids. Though the responsibility was overwhelming, seeing Leonard laugh as Clara painted his fingernails or Mason shared stories about school made every moment worthwhile. Late one evening after the children had gone to bed, Leonard and Caleb sat in the small living room. Leonard, frail but determined to keep a cheerful front, sipped weak tea. His face softened as he spoke. "Caleb, I know things aren't easy right now," Leonard began, his voice shaky but steady. "I see the strain on your face. Vanessa, she's not here, is she?" Caleb hesitated, then shook his head. "No, Dad. She left, said she needed a break." Leonard sighed, his eyes full of sorrow. "I'm sorry, son. I've become a burden on you. Maybe I should have gone to a hospice. You shouldn't have to—" "No," Caleb interrupted sharply. He leaned forward, gripping Leonard's frail hand. "You are not a burden. Don't you ever say that again." Leonard's eyes filled with tears. "I never wanted this for you. I thought I'd be able to handle things myself, not disrupt your life like this. You have your kids, your job, your own worries, and now—" Caleb shook his head, his voice breaking. "You don't understand, Dad. You are my life right now. You've always been there for me. When I was sick as a kid, you stayed up all night, holding my hand, making sure I knew I wasn't alone. I will never forget that." Leonard's shoulders trembled, and tears spilled down his cheeks. "That's what fathers do," he whispered. "And now it's my turn," Caleb said firmly, his own tears flowing freely. "To make sure you know you're not alone. You're not going to die in some cold, impersonal hospital room. You're going to be here, with your family, with people who love you." The two men embraced tightly, their tears mingling as they clung to each other. Caleb felt Leonard's frailty, the fragility of a life nearing its end, and yet he also felt the strength of their bond, unbreakable, unshakable, forged through a lifetime of love and sacrifice. "I love you, Dad," Caleb choked out. "I love you too, son," Leonard replied, his voice barely above a whisper. For the first time in weeks, Caleb felt a sense of peace. He had chosen the path of love, of loyalty, of honoring the man who had shaped his life. And as Leonard rested his head on Caleb's shoulder, both men knew that despite the challenges ahead, they would face them together, as father and son. Before you find out what happens next, please subscribe to the channel. The days passed in a blur for Caleb. Between caring for Leonard and juggling the responsibilities of raising Mason and Clara, he barely had time to process the emotional upheaval of his collapsing marriage. Yet, when the call came from Vanessa's lawyer 2 weeks after her departure, Caleb knew he couldn't ignore it. The court hearing was scheduled for the following week, a date that loomed over him like a dark cloud. Leonard's condition was worsening visibly by the day, and Caleb couldn't fathom leaving his father's side to attend a legal battle. His lawyer, Sarah Redding, a compassionate and sharp-witted professional, assured him she'd do everything possible to delay the proceedings. "Given your circumstances, we have a strong case for a postponement," Sarah explained over the phone. "Your father's health is clearly deteriorating, and you're the primary caregiver for him. I'll file the motion first thing in the morning." A week later, Sarah presented their case to the judge. She detailed Leonard's terminal illness and the burden Caleb carried as a single parent in the absence of Vanessa. The judge, a middle-aged woman with a kind but firm demeanor, listened carefully. After a brief deliberation, she ruled in Caleb's favor, postponing the hearing for a month and a half. "Take care of your family, Mr. Morton," the judge said kindly. "I'll see you in court when you're ready." That evening, Caleb received an unexpected phone call from Vanessa. Her voice was sharp, laced with frustration. "Because of your father," she snapped. "We can't even get a divorce. How absurd is that?" Caleb felt his anger rising, but forced himself to remain calm. "Vanessa," he said evenly, "what's absurd is that you left me, abandoned our children, and now you're trying to pressure me into rushing this while I'm dealing with my dad's final days. Where the hell are you anyway?" Vanessa hesitated, then said defensively, "I'm visiting my mother." Don't yell at me, Caleb. You're the one who forced me to take radical action. I could have gone crazy living in that environment. I needed a break. Caleb's grip on the phone tightened. A break? He echoed, his voice tinged with disbelief. That's what you're calling this? Leaving me to handle everything while you… What? Relax? Reset? You don't get to rewrite this story, Vanessa. You made a choice to walk away. Don't guilt me, she shot back. You didn't leave me any other options. The words stung, but Caleb had heard enough. Vanessa, he said firmly, I don't have time for this. I'm busy. Without waiting for her response, he ended the call and set the phone down, his heart pounding. Caleb returned to the living room, where Leonard was resting in his recliner. Clara was perched on the arm of the chair, reading him a story about a brave knight rescuing a princess. Mason was sprawled on the floor with his Lego set, constructing an elaborate castle. Watching them, Caleb felt a pang of gratitude amidst the chaos. Whatever Vanessa's actions, his children and his father were his anchor, grounding him in a storm of uncertainty. Leonard's health declined rapidly over the next few days. Once a man of quiet strength and endless determination, he now spent most of his time in bed, too weak to move. Caleb stayed close, tending to his father's every need, while the children played quietly in the next room, their laughter a small comfort in the growing stillness. One evening, as the house settled into the quiet rhythm of night, Leonard called for Caleb. His voice, though faint, carried a sense of urgency. Caleb quickly made his way to his father's room, pulling a chair to sit beside the bed. Leonard's eyes were tired but filled with warmth. Caleb, he began, his voice barely above a whisper, I need to thank you for everything. Dad, Caleb interrupted, you don't have to. Leonard raised a trembling hand to silence him. Let me finish, son. You've been my greatest blessing. A good man, a good father, a good son, even better than I could have ever hoped to be. Tears welled up in Caleb's eyes, but he nodded, letting Leonard continue. I know life hasn't been kind to you lately, Leonard said, his gaze steady despite his frailty. But remember this, strength isn't about never falling. It's about getting up every time you do. You've done right by me, Caleb. You've done right by your kids. Just don't lose yourself trying to fix everything. Dad! Caleb's voice broke, the words catching in his throat. I should be thanking you for everything you taught me, for being there, for just being you. Leonard smiled faintly. I didn't do anything special. I just loved you. That's all a father can do. They sat in silence for a long moment, Leonard's hand resting weakly on Caleb's. Caleb knew this was goodbye. His heart ached, but he drew strength from Leonard's courage. I love you, Dad, Caleb said softly. I love you too, son, Leonard whispered. And with that, he closed his eyes, his breathing steady but shallow as sleep claimed him. The next morning, Caleb found his father peaceful and still. Leonard had passed quietly in the night, his journey complete. Caleb sat beside him for a long time, his grief tempered by the knowledge that Leonard's suffering was over. Still, the finality of the moment weighed heavily on him. There was no time to linger in sorrow. Caleb had to make arrangements for the funeral, handle legalities, and ensure the children were cared for amidst it all. After composing himself, he called Vanessa, hoping she would step up for their family in this moment of need. Vanessa answered after several rings. Her voice was nervous, almost clipped. Caleb, what is it? Dad's gone, Caleb said, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. I need you to come back and take care of the kids for a few days. There was a long pause. In the background, Caleb thought he heard a faint murmur, a man's voice, low and indistinct. Vanessa's response was rushed and defensive. I can't right now. I've got things going on. I'll send Mom instead. She'll help. Vanessa, Caleb began, but he stopped himself. Whatever was happening on her end, he didn't have the energy to care right now. Fine, just make sure she comes soon. True to her word, Samantha arrived later that evening. Warm and no nonsense, she took over the children's care with practiced ease, allowing Caleb the space he needed to organize Leonard's funeral. Samantha asked no questions about Vanessa, though Caleb suspected she had plenty. The funeral was a small but heartfelt affair. Friends, neighbors, and former colleagues came to pay their respects to a man whose quiet strength had touched so many lives. Caleb stood with Mason and Clara by his side, feeling both the weight of his loss and the comfort of knowing his father had been deeply loved. The day after the funeral, Caleb was sorting through paperwork when his phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but he answered anyway. "Mr. Morton?" a formal voice asked. "This is Harold Whitmore, an attorney handling your father's estate. I've been trying to reach you. I have some news regarding an inheritance." Caleb frowned, confused. "Inheritance? I wasn't aware my dad—" "It's a bit complex," the lawyer interrupted. "It would be best if we could meet to discuss the details." Caleb agreed, setting a time for later in the week. He hung up the phone, his mind racing. His father had never mentioned anything about an inheritance. As far as Caleb knew, Leonard had lived modestly on his pension, with little left over. Samantha, who had overheard the call, entered the room. "What was that about?" she asked, curiosity evident in her tone. Caleb looked up, his expression equal parts confusion and intrigue. "Apparently, Dad left me something. I have no idea what it could be." Samantha smiled faintly. "Whatever it is, I'm sure it's meaningful." Caleb nodded, a mix of curiosity and apprehension swirling in his mind. Whatever awaited him, he knew it would be a final gift from the man who had shaped his life so profoundly. Caleb stepped into Harold Whitmore's quiet, book-lined office, his mind racing. The last few days had been an emotional whirlwind. Losing Leonard, arranging the funeral, and now this unexpected meeting about an inheritance Caleb hadn't known existed. Harold, a middle-aged man with a kind smile and sharp eyes, rose to greet him. "Mr. Morton, I'm so sorry for your loss," he said, shaking Caleb's hand firmly. "Your father was a remarkable man." "Thank you," Caleb replied, taking the offered seat. "But I have to admit, I'm confused. My dad never mentioned anything about, well, an inheritance." Harold nodded sympathetically and gestured to a thick folder on his desk. "I understand. Let me explain." Over the next hour, Harold walked Caleb through Leonard's financial documents. The revelations left Caleb stunned. Leonard, it turned out, had been quietly building a substantial fortune. He had multiple bank accounts, a diversified stock portfolio, and even a collection of gold and silver bars stored securely in a bank vault. Harold estimated the total value of Leonard's assets to be just shy of 8 figures, possibly more, depending on the current market. Caleb blinked, struggling to process the numbers. "How is this possible?" he asked, his voice thick with disbelief. "My dad lived so modestly. He didn't buy anything he didn't need. How could he have all this?" Harold leaned back, his expression thoughtful. "Your father was a man of great intelligence and foresight. He may have lived simply, but he had a gift for investing. He understood markets, researched opportunities, and made smart, patient decisions. He wasn't flashy about it, but over decades his wealth grew steadily." Caleb shook his head, trying to reconcile the man he knew, the quiet, practical engineer, with the savvy investor Harold described. "He never said a word about this. Not once." "Leonard was a private man," Harold said gently. "But he was also deeply thoughtful. In our last conversation, he spoke at length about you, Caleb." Caleb's breath hitched. "About me?" Harold nodded and opened the folder, pulling out a handwritten letter. "He said he wanted you to have this. He believed in you, Caleb. He thought the world of you. He was especially proud of your work as a teacher." Caleb took the letter, his hands trembling. Harold continued, "Leonard was aware of how hard you worked and how much you sacrificed for your family, but he also worried that being a teacher might limit your ability to achieve something he knew was your dream." Caleb swallowed hard, blinking back tears. "He knew about my dream?" Harold smiled faintly. "Yes, he did. He told me how much you've always wanted to open a private school for gifted children. a place where kids could thrive under the guidance of someone who truly cares about their potential. He saw that as your calling, Caleb, and he wanted to make sure you had the means to pursue it. Caleb couldn't hold back his tears any longer. He clutched the letter to his chest, his father's faith in him resonating deeply. He believed in me that much? More than you know, Harold said warmly. Leonard considered you a magnificent and talented person. He wanted this money to give you freedom, the freedom to build your dream and to ensure a good, comfortable life for you and your children. Caleb sat in silence, tears streaming down his face as the weight of his father's love and sacrifice settled over him. Leonard had lived frugally, denying himself luxuries so that he could leave Caleb the tools to achieve his dreams. Thank you, Caleb whispered, his voice cracking. Thank you for sharing this with me. Harold gave him an understanding nod. Your father's legacy isn't just in these accounts, Caleb. It's in the man you are. He saw greatness in you, and now it's up to you to honor his vision. Caleb left the office that day with a heavy heart, but a renewed sense of purpose. Leonard's parting gift was more than financial. It was a testament to the quiet, enduring love of a father who had always believed in his son. As Caleb walked out into the sunlight, he vowed to make his father proud. Caleb chose to keep his inheritance private for the time being. The knowledge of Leonard's wealth was both a gift and a burden, and Caleb didn't trust how people might react, especially Vanessa. For now, his focus was on preparing for the upcoming divorce proceedings, while managing his grief over his father's death. But just days after Caleb's meeting with Harold, Vanessa appeared at the door, her demeanor shockingly different. She smiled warmly, carrying a casserole dish she had clearly picked up from a grocery store, still warm in its packaging. Caleb, she said, her voice soft and almost sweet, I wanted to check on you and the kids. I know this has been a hard time for all of you. Caleb was taken aback, blinking at her in disbelief. The last time they spoke, Vanessa had been defensive and dismissive. Now she stood before him, the picture of concern and warmth. I'm surprised to see you, Caleb said cautiously, stepping aside to let her in. You seemed pretty busy last time we talked. Vanessa gave a small laugh, brushing off his remark. I know I wasn't my best, Caleb, but I've had time to think, and I realized I don't want to rush into anything we might regret. She sat at the dining table as though nothing had happened, her tone casual yet calculated. Maybe we should put the divorce on hold for now, she suggested. Give ourselves some time to grieve, to heal, and to think about the future. Caleb watched her closely, his mind racing. What had changed? Then he remembered Samantha's presence during the days following Leonard's death. Could she have overheard something about the inheritance? Perhaps even snooped through the documents he'd brought home? The thought made his stomach churn. That's quite a shift, Caleb said carefully. He noticed how Vanessa avoided meeting his gaze, her hands fidgeting slightly. Why the sudden change of heart? Vanessa hesitated, then plastered on a sad smile. I realized how much I've missed you and the kids, how important family is. I know I made mistakes, but I think we owe it to ourselves to at least try again. The words felt rehearsed, and Caleb couldn't help but notice how over-the-top her gestures had become. She even asked about his work and the kids' school projects, topics she had barely touched on before. Samantha, who had been in the kitchen, wandered in at that moment, chiming in. She's right, Caleb, Samantha said, her tone pointed. Family is the most important thing. You two should think about reconciliation. It's what Leonard would have wanted. Caleb suppressed a laugh at the irony. Caleb nodded politely but offered no agreement. As the evening wore on, Vanessa continued her performance. She praised Caleb's parenting, reminisced about the good times, and hinted at future plans they could make as a family. Caleb listened quietly, piecing together the real motive behind her sudden transformation. Even the faintest hint of an inheritance had spurred her into action. What would she do if she knew the full extent of Leonard's estate? Finally, Vanessa addressed the looming divorce proceedings. "Do we really need to go through with all that legal mess?" she asked with a small sigh. "Can't we just take some time to think before making any final decisions?" Caleb leaned back in his chair, his expression calm but unreadable. "Vanessa," he began, his voice measured, "I appreciate you coming here, and I understand you've had time to reflect. But I'm still in mourning. I just lost my father, and this is a difficult time for me." Vanessa opened her mouth to interject, but Caleb continued, his tone firmer. "We still need to talk about our marriage. That conversation will happen in court, as the hearing is soon. Until then, I need space to think about everything." Vanessa's face faltered for a moment, a flicker of frustration crossing her features before she composed herself again. "Of course," she said, her tone overly gracious. "Take all the time you need." As she left, Samantha offered Caleb a knowing look, but he couldn't bring himself to engage. Once the door closed behind them, Caleb sighed deeply, leaning against the table. The charade had only just begun, but he saw through it clearly. As the court date approached, Caleb felt an increasing sense of urgency. Vanessa's sudden transformation into a doting wife didn't sit well with him, and he couldn't shake the memory of the phone call on the day his father passed. The faint sound of a man's voice in the background and Vanessa's nervous tone. He decided to consult with Sarah, his lawyer, to discuss his next steps. Caleb laid out everything: Vanessa's abrupt return, her suspicious change in behavior, Samantha's likely discovery of his inheritance documents, and the lingering question of what Vanessa had been doing during her absence. Sarah listened intently, her fingers tapping lightly on her desk as Caleb finished. "It sounds like there's more going on here than just a divorce," she said thoughtfully. "Vanessa's behavior suggests she's hiding something, and the mention of the inheritance seems to have triggered her change of heart." Caleb nodded. "I think she knows about the inheritance, or at least suspects. And I still can't forget that phone call. I'm almost certain she wasn't with her mother, like she claimed." Sarah leaned back in her chair, considering her next words. "If you're ready to go through with the divorce, we can proceed without delving into this. But if you want to know the truth, there are ways to find out. For example, her phone could tell us a lot: messages, call logs, even location data." Caleb hesitated. "Wouldn't that cross a line?" Sarah smiled faintly. "It's not illegal to check someone's phone if you have access to it, especially since she's technically still your spouse. But it's up to you. Do you want closure, Caleb? Or do you just want to move on?" Over the next few days, Caleb mulled over Sarah's suggestion. Ultimately, he decided he needed answers, not just for the divorce, but for his own peace of mind. He devised a plan to get access to Vanessa's phone and persuaded Mason and Clara to spend time with their mother, suggesting they ask her to take them to the park or for ice cream. Vanessa, eager to maintain her facade as the attentive mother, readily agreed. As Vanessa and the kids were about to leave, Caleb managed to pull out Vanessa's smartphone. The first thing he discovered confirmed his suspicions. Samantha had indeed snooped through his inheritance documents. A string of messages between Samantha and Vanessa revealed everything. "Samantha, I overheard Caleb on the phone. He's getting a significant inheritance. I saw the folder too. He's sitting on a fortune, Vanessa." "Vanessa, seriously? How much?" "Samantha, enough to live comfortably for the rest of your life. You should reconsider the divorce. Just saying." Caleb clenched his jaw. The messages made it clear that Vanessa's sudden change in behavior was rooted in financial greed, not remorse or love. Then he found something even more damning: a lengthy exchange with a man named Derek. The messages painted a clear picture. Vanessa hadn't gone to her mother's house after leaving Caleb. She had spent her time with Derek, who was unmistakably her lover. "Derek, can't wait to see you tonight. Are you sure Caleb won't find out?" "Vanessa, don't worry about him. He's too busy playing the saint with his dying father." "Derek, you deserve better than this mess. Just stay with me." "Vanessa, soon. Just let me figure this out first. I need time." The dates of the messages corresponded with the time Vanessa claimed to be at her mother's. Caleb's hands trembled as he scrolled further, taking pictures of the incriminating texts. He returned the phone to its spot just as Vanessa and the kids came back. The next day, Caleb shared everything with Sarah. He showed her the photos of the messages and recounted what he had found. Sarah's expression was one of grim satisfaction. "This changes things," she said, flipping through the images. "Infidelity is a significant factor in divorce proceedings. If we present this evidence in court, it could affect custody arrangements and financial settlements in your favor." Caleb nodded, feeling a mix of anger and relief. "I just want what's best for my kids, and I want her out of my life." "You've taken the right steps," Sarah assured him. "We'll approach the hearing with this information, but I'll handle the strategy. You focus on staying calm and composed." The courtroom buzzed with quiet tension as Caleb and Vanessa sat at opposing tables, their lawyers flanking them. Caleb remained stoic, his resolve hardened after weeks of preparation. Vanessa, by contrast, appeared nervous, darting glances toward Caleb as though trying to gauge his mood. The judge, a stern but fair woman in her 50s, called the proceedings to order. "We're here to resolve the dissolution of the marriage between Caleb Morton and Vanessa Morton. Let's begin." Vanessa's lawyer, a slick-talking man named Gerald Grant, stood first. "Your Honor, before we proceed, my client would like to request that we postpone this divorce. She believes there's still a chance to reconcile, given time and counseling." Vanessa nodded earnestly, her voice soft as she addressed the court. "Your Honor, I admit I've made mistakes, but I love my husband and my children. I believe we can rebuild what we've lost." Sarah Redding, Caleb's lawyer, rose to her feet, her expression sharp. "Your Honor, while reconciliation may sound noble, the facts paint a very different picture. Let me outline what has transpired in the months leading up to this hearing." Sarah began methodically, detailing how Vanessa abandoned Caleb during one of the most challenging periods of his life, when his father was terminally ill, and dumped their children on him while she went on an unannounced vacation. "My client was left to shoulder the responsibilities of caregiving for his dying father, managing his household, and caring for 2 young children, all while Vanessa went on a so-called break, failing to communicate or provide support," Sarah stated firmly. "This isn't the behavior of someone committed to their marriage or family." Vanessa stiffened, leaning toward her microphone. "I was emotionally exhausted," she exclaimed, her voice trembling with an attempt at vulnerability. "I didn't handle things well, but it doesn't mean I stopped caring. I needed time to heal, to find myself again." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "And did healing involve misleading your husband about your whereabouts and spending time with another man?" The courtroom fell silent as Sarah produced the printed evidence of Vanessa's text messages with Derek and Samantha, along with screenshots of her communication about Caleb's inheritance. "Your Honor," Sarah continued, "we have proof that Vanessa wasn't staying with her mother during her absence, as she claimed. She was with her lover. Additionally, her sudden return and newfound desire to reconcile coincided with her discovery of an inheritance Caleb received after his father's passing. These messages make her motives clear." Vanessa's face drained of color. I didn't—" "Let me read a message from Vanessa to her lover Derek," Sarah interrupted, holding up the document. "Don't worry about him. He's too busy playing the saint with his dying father." "Your Honor, this is not the language of someone emotionally invested in their family. This is manipulation, plain and simple." Vanessa shot to her feet, her composure unraveling. "It's not like that. I made mistakes, but I came back because I realized what I'd done. I love my husband. I love my kids." Sarah remained calm. "Your Honor, this isn't about Vanessa's claims of love. It's about actions that show a pattern of abandonment, deceit, and self-interest." Gerald tried to regain control, raising objections about the relevance of the messages, but the judge allowed them to stand, citing their importance in demonstrating intent and credibility. The confrontation continued for over an hour. Vanessa's initial confidence crumbled under the weight of the evidence. Every attempt to justify her actions was met with cold, hard facts from Sarah's arsenal, timelines, text logs, and accounts of Caleb's unwavering dedication to his family. even under the immense strain of grief. Finally, Vanessa broke. Tears streamed down her face as she shouted, "I just didn't know what to do. I was lost. I didn't mean to hurt anyone." The judge's gavel struck, calling for order. "Mrs. Morton," she said sternly, "this is not about emotions, it's about accountability." When the proceedings concluded, the judge delivered her verdict. Caleb was awarded full custody of Mason and Clara, the family home, and the bulk of the remaining assets. Vanessa would retain only a modest portion of their shared savings, enough to restart her life, but far less than she had likely hoped for. The inheritance Leonard left Caleb, untouched and legally separate from marital property, remained entirely in Caleb's control. As the gavel struck for the final time, Vanessa slumped in her seat, defeated and sobbing. Caleb stood tall, his heart heavy but resolute. He had fought not out of spite, but for his children and the integrity of his father's legacy. Walking out of the courtroom, he felt a mix of relief and sorrow, knowing the battle was over but the scars would linger. Outside, Sarah patted his shoulder. "You did well, Caleb," she said. "Now it's time to focus on your kids and on building that future your father believed in." Caleb nodded, looking up at the sky, a quiet promise forming in his heart. This was only the beginning. In the weeks following the trial, Vanessa made several desperate attempts to mend her relationship with Caleb. She called, texted, and even showed up uninvited at the house, pleading with him to reconsider. She insisted that the messages with Derek were misunderstood, claiming they didn't mean what they seemed to, and that she had never truly been unfaithful. "It was a mistake, Caleb," she said tearfully one evening, standing on his porch. "I was overwhelmed. I wasn't thinking straight. I didn't cheat on you, I swear. Please, can't we try again?" Caleb looked at her with a calm resolve that Vanessa had come to recognize all too well. "Vanessa," he said firmly, "you may deny the affair, but the real betrayal happened when you made me choose between you and my father. That moment was enough to end us. I'll always be civil for the kids, but there's nothing left between us." Vanessa's face crumpled, but Caleb held his ground. He had made peace with his decision and refused to be swayed by her tears. Eventually, Vanessa gave up. Her attempts at reconciliation grew sporadic and half-hearted before stopping entirely. She tried to build a life with Derek, moving in with him in hopes of a fresh start. But their relationship quickly soured under the strain of unmet expectations and simmering resentment. Within months, they parted ways, leaving Vanessa to face the consequences of her choices alone. Meanwhile, Caleb focused on building a new life for himself and his children, guided by the lessons his father had taught him. He carefully managed Leonard's inheritance, splitting it between two priorities: creating the school he had always dreamed of, and securing a stable financial future through further investments. The school became his passion project. Nestled in a quiet corner of the town, the private academy for gifted children was named the Leonard Morton Institute for Excellence, a tribute to his father's memory and belief in the power of education. The school quickly gained a reputation for its innovative teaching methods and nurturing environment, a reflection of Caleb's vision and dedication. At home, Caleb created a life filled with stability and warmth for Mason and Clara. He was present for every milestone, from Mason's soccer games to Clara's ballet recitals, cherishing the time he spent with them. Though life was busy, Caleb always made time to tell them stories about their grandfather, about his quiet wisdom, his integrity, and the legacy of love and sacrifice he had left behind. On quiet evenings, after the kids had gone to bed, Caleb often sat in his study, looking at the photo of Leonard on his desk. He would smile, feeling his father's presence in the choices he made and the values he instilled in his children. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to the channel. I wish you a great mood and good luck.